The feud between the Whitfields, Banners, and the Duntons in the TV series 1923 is also known as the Sheep Wars. And that's what we're going to go over today, the Sheep Wars.
Ladies and gentlemen of all ages, boys and girls, thank you for tuning in to yet another episode of Angry Meat Production. We appreciate you coming in and letting us be a part of your lives week in and week out. We hope to do our best to present you with something that your eardrums delight in. Whether you're looking at us on YouTube or Rumble, or listening to us on Spotify, Google, or Anchor, or any of the other podcast services that we are currently on or trying to get on. We thank you. And if you don't mind, at the end of every episode, stop by, leave us a comment, leave us a like. If it asks for 5 stars, we'll take 5 stars, even if you don't like us. 5 stars are what it's all about. With that being said, we hope you enjoy our attempt to make our advocation our vocation. Ladies and gentlemen, let the games begin. We here at Angry Me Production want to thank our sponsor, Mobile Notary Mindy. She's certified with the National Notary Association. She's also bonded and E&O insured. She offers a wide range of services including wills, powers of attorney, medical documents, healthcare proxies, living wills, certification of trust, assignment of personal property, HIPAA waivers, advanced healthcare directives, and 99 verification. You can find her on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Mobile Notary Mindy. You can also visit her webpage at TexasMobileNotaryMindy.com. That's TX, MobileNotaryMindy.com. Thank you so much, and enjoy the show.
Welcome, Angry Faithful. Yes, today we're going to go over the Sheep Wars because we went over James Miller last episode, the Texas assassin who killed 51 men. Check that out later on. But yeah, it's really interesting of how this all spanned out. It spanned out in, I think, 4 states, all reality. Now, what we're going to go over first is the reason why the Sheep Wars happened. It covers a little bit in the Sheep War notes and everything, but I want you to understand the reason why they had these wars. Now, mainly starting out with the Sheep Wars is because of the sheep themselves. The sheep, although they use for wool, meat, milk, lamb meat, all. The problem with that is their eating habits. Cows, on the other hand, use them for meat and just milk, meat, milk, and leather. Now, the difference between is their eating habits. A cow will eat on the land and they'll just graze. And they'll eat the grass that they can see. Sheep, on the other hand, eat so much to where they eat the roots, and it's basically a deserted land after the sheep get it. Now, and also the cows fertilize the lands they graze because of their feces, and it's a very good for the land. Now, let's go over the Sheep Wars. Now, the Sheep Wars, or also the Sheep and Cattle Wars, were a series of armed conflicts in the western United States fought between sheepmen and cattlemen over grazing rights. Sheep wars occurred in many of the western states, although they were most common in Texas, Arizona, and the border of the region of Wyoming and Colorado, and Montana, because that's where 1923 is. Generally, the cattlemen saw the sheep herders as invaders who destroyed the public grazing lands, which sheep do that, which had to share on a first come, first served basis between 1870 to 1920. Approximately 120 engagement occurred in 8 states or territories. At least 54 men were killed and some 50,000 to over 100,000 sheep were slaughtered. Now, the history of it. Cattle ranches were well-established trade in Texas by 1870. When sheep herders was starting to become popular in other parts of the Old West. Because of this, in Texas and elsewhere, many cattlemen had a close relationship with local government figures and were able to use their influence to their advantage. According to one unnamed Texas historian, that's pretty bad. You don't want to be named as a Texas historian. That okay. That it's just really strange that you're a historian and you don't want to be named, unless they didn't get the name and he just wrote it down. In court actions, the cowboy or cattleman also usually won. The sheep herders were usually always the weaker of the antagonists. They were often advocated of free grazing on public land, while the cattlemen typically fenced off the territory. This is another thing that happened is they get they got really pissed off to the point where they'd end up hiring assassins, James Miller and his team, to stop people from fencing off their land, both cattlemen and sheep herders. Anyways, whether it be public or private land, there was many reasons why cattle ranchers built fences. Mostly, it was to mark boundaries, preventing rustling and keep others from grazing their animals on their land. There was also a threat of sheep scab, which is uh, their mites, including the agents that cause. I'm gonna have to look up this word. Stephen Hawking, please help me on this one. And it is trying to figure it out too.
Seroptic mange.
Seroptic mage, and seroptic is a genius of mites, and they lived on sheep. Building fences across the range and infuriated the sheep herders, as well as open range cattlemen. So conflicts like the fence cutting war, which was a occurred in the end of the 19th century in the American Old West, where a series of disputes between farmers, cattlemen were large landholders. Also, newcomers came to the American West to build farms, established cattlemen began to fence off their large tracts of land. Now, another fun fact about Texas, 93% is privately owned. So there you go. Texas is pretty big. One of the earliest sheep wars was fought in 1875 in the Charleston Goodnight Range among the Texas-New Mexican border. Later, sheep wars occurred in the central and west Texas counties of Shrewsbury, Nolan, Brown, Crane, Tom Green, Sensuba, and Coleman. And Sensuba is the county where James Miller was at. On March 9th, 1881, the state of Texas passed a law authorizing the appointments of sheep inspectors who were to quarantine infected of the sheep scab. However, the law only drove the sheep hunters undercover. I just had this thought that basically you just put like a big blanket over the sheep, and if you had like a big herd, it's going to be a big blanket. And you're like, "Do you have sheep here?" No, we don't have sheep here. Okay. Well, why is the blanket moving around? No. Anyways, there was also laws passed to prevent sheep herders from grazing on public land entirely. And enforcement was largely ineffective, though, because there was no representative of the United States General Land Office in West Texas. In April 1883, another law was passed that called for sheep herders to present a certificate showing that their herd has been inspected for scabies before crossing any county borders. Cutting fences became a felony in 1884, and around the same time, West Texas established a land rustle. Land rustle was an event in which previously a restricted land in the United States was openly to homestead on the first of arrival basic. Uh, Lands were opened and sold first come or by bid, or won by lottery, or by the means of other than a run. And this what was that movie with the it was like Tom Cruise, and there was a movie Tom Cruise, like Tom Cruise and his wife at the time, Nicole Kidman. Let's see if I can find it. It was a good movie. He should have won an Academy Award for that one. There's lots of movies he was in that he should have won a awards for. I don't know. Oh, Far and Away, 1992 movie. Anyways, now okay. Uh, okay. West Texas experienced a land rush, which sealed off many sheep and cattlemen from accessing public land. In some cases, sheep herders were forced to cut fences and cross into private property in order to reach public land. But eventually, a type of code was evolved that required the herder to drive his flock at least 5 miles a day on level terrain, or at least 3 miles a day in rougher counties, which crossing private land. Comparative to other American states, the level of violence in the Texas Shepherd Wars was minimal. That's kind of bad. It was minimal. Okay. Now, in Arizona, of all the range wars in the American history, the Pleasant Valley War in Arizona was the most costly. It was fought between the families of John D. Tewksbury and Tom Graham. Though both the Tewksbury and Graham families were cattle ranchers, the former supporters, the sheep herders, when they began entering the Pleasant Valley War in 1885. The sudden appearance of a large flock of sheep in public land that had been previously used exclusively for cattle. That's actually part of 1923. It was like the first episode, what they did. But by 1886, it was illegal for sheep herders to move their herd within 2 miles of cattle grazing. And the Mulgan Rim, which is a tropical and geological features cutting across the northern half of the United States of Arizona. It extends approximately 200 miles, starting in northern Yapa County, running eastwards, ending near the border of New Mexico. Now, was an unofficial border or deadline, which no sheep were permitted south of. Pleasant Valley was located beyond the border. So when the Daggs brothers and the Turkins began moving in sheep, the local cattle ranchers, such as the Grahams, resisted violently by attacking the sheep herders. The Grahams and the Torksburg, I'm Stephanie Hawking, help me out with this one.
Tewksbury's.
I totally butchered that. Man, I chopped that up like a big beef. Let's go at it again.
Tewksbury's.
Tewksbury had been feuding since 1882, but the first bloodshed wasn't until 1885 when John D. Tewksbury leased a herd of sheep from the Dagg brothers and had driven it to Pleasant Valley by a Vasquez sheep herder. Their Southwest European ethnic group characterized as Basque's language and common culture and shared genetic ancestry to the Vascos and Aquitians. Aquitians? Aquananian? I'm curious. Reason why I'm curious, because
Aquitanians.
Aquitanians. Aquilodians is in Conan the Barbarian. Anyways, somewhere along the trail, the sheep herders was ambushed and killed by Annie Cooper, a member of the Graham faction, an association of the Hash Knife Cowboys, who were also in conflict with sheep herders. A second incident occurred in February 1887. The Stephanie Hawking, help me out with this word. It's UTE. It's in Indian.
Ute.
Ute sheep Wow, the huge sheep was beheaded about 2 miles north of Grand Ranches while he was driving some of the dag sheep through the area. Though no one was ever charged, Tom Graham is believed to have been responsible. The U.S. Army later dispatched Indian scouts to follow the murderer's trail, and according to the author Leland J. Hatchett, the treks led to Tom's cabin. The situation escalated into a gunfight on the Middleton Ranch on August 9th, 1887. The ranch was owned by a man named George Newton, who was the family friend of the Stephen Hawking. Help me with this word because I am Tewksbury's. Dyslexia hits me again. Members of Crown's faction uh, and some Hash-Night cowboys were out searching for Martin believes dead or alive. And they assumed that Tewksbury knew something about his disappearance. The group included 5 men and was led by Hampton's Belvins, the son of Martin and half brother of Andy Cooper, who was killed in the Basquez sheepherder. The 3 of the other men were the Hatch Nice cowboy John Payne, Major Payne. I love that movie. Yes, I digress and it clicks. Thomas Carrington and Robert Gaspy. The final man was another cowboy named Tom Tucker. There was 6 men that occupied the Middleton Ranch when Bevel's party arrived. 3 of whom were Tewksbury's. At first, Belvin's party approached the ranch and requested food for the night, but at some point they rode off and began shooting towards the house. However, other accounts said that the first shot was fired by the men inside the house. What is known is that Hampton and John Payne were dead without loss to the Tewksbury side. Tucker and Gaspy were also wounded in the Carrington escaped with his clothing perforated by a bullet. A clear defeat for the Graham faction. The war turned into a long series of revenge killings. You know, assassins with the revenge killings with like Hatchville and McCoy and what James Miller's did in the last episode, it spans long. The assassins make money doing that stuff. And it's more or less like mafia wars and everything. I'm just saying the war turned into along several of the revenge killings. By the time the war ended in 1892, about 25 people had been killed, including all the men in the Graham family and also in the Belvins and the Tewksbury's family. There was another sheep war in Arizona behind the Graham and Tewksbury feud in 1884 near the San Francisco Mountain. Angry cattlemen rode up over 100 wild horses, strapping cowbells to their necks and rawhide to their tails, and then drove them to a series of sheep herders numbering about 25,000, yelling and firing guns in the process. The sheep scattered in all directions. Many were killed and wounded, and it took a week to gather up all their surviving stock of the sheep. That same year, cowboys drove over 4,000 sheep until the little Colorado River, many of which died in quicksand. Dude, that's something you don't hear a lot, dying of quicksand. But also in Wyoming and Colorado area, the sheep wars in the Wyoming, Colorado area were especially violent and lasted until well after the turn of the century. Like in Texas, Arizona, cattlemen of Colorado were unwilling to share their pastures with the sheep herders who were crossing into the state from the southern Wyoming. In Wyoming alone, there were about 24 attacks and at least 6 deaths between 1879 and 1909. Throughout the other accounts say that other 16 people were killed. The most well-known of this conflict was the Routt County Sheep War, in which the cattlemen of Routt County, Colorado, attempted to keep the Wyoming sheep herders from entering their grazing ranges. On May 23rd, 1895, the newspaper Cheyenne Leader, which was a newspaper in the area, reported that 4 days previously, riders were sent out to scour the county and warn the settlers that sheepmen now holding their flock on Snake River at the Wyoming line border, where contemporary and an invasion of Bear River cattle ranges. The effect was electrical, and by the noon today, until 350 cattlemen and feeders were assembled to decide upon
Decide.
decide upon the positive actions to keep their sheep back. Shortly after that, the cattlemen adopted a series of resolutions that established deadlines and effected banning all sheep herders from entering northwest Colorado. However, the Cheyenne leader reported that the sheep herders would most likely disregard the ban and enter the state anyway. To enforce the resolution, the newspaper said the stock feeder and cattlemen, with a force of 800 to 1,000, were holding themselves in readiness forcibly to resist any advancing made south of Hans Peak by the sheep owners. The war is immense, and unless the more conservative heads prevail, the rifle will figure a
Conspicuous.
conspicuous part in the Route County sheep war. The sheep that are causing the trouble are some 60,000 heads, along with J.G. and G.W. Edwards and others in Wyoming. Despite the newspaper claims, most of the sheep herders respected the cattlemen's resolve, which diffused the situation before it became too serious. There were, however, at least 4 violent episodes in the region during the time. First occurred in 1894 in Garfield County, when 3,800 sheep were driven over cliffs into Parachute Creek. Okay, that is a good play on words. 3,800 went over a place. I'm just making sure that my dyslexia didn't kick in too bad, and it's just reading this wrong.
Parachute.
Yeah, it's Parachute Creek. Okay. Sorry. Sometimes I read this stuff, my dyslexia kicks in, and I'm just reading it, and I'm thinking, no, that can't be right. No, it is right. Okay, I'll read it right. But it's just kind of funny that they drove the sheep over Parachute Creek, which we all know what parachutes are. I find that humorous. The sheep herders Carl Brown attempted to stop the cowboys from killing the flock, but he was shot in the hip when a posse from Parachute, Colorado, rode out to the scene. They found the wounded Brown and the massed dead sheep at the foot of a 1,000-foot bluff. Craig Courier reported the following on September 14th, 1894. The owners of the sheep are resistant to Parachute with rights to the adjusted range, and the posse made a futile race to apprehend the raiders. John Miller, owner, owned 17,000 of the sheep, and Charles Brown, the uncle of the wounded man, 2,100. About 1,500 more sheep were massacred the same year in the same county. According to Jack Edwards of Wyoming, in late June 1896, 2 of the sheep herders were killed by Colorado cowboys, and 300 of his herd was massacred. Upon learning of the raid, Edwards headed towards the scene, but he was intercepted by a party of masked men who ordered him to remove the rest of his flock back across the border. After the raid on January 23rd, 1893, Edwards told the Omaha Reporter the following: I have an armed force of about 50 men ready to clash when it comes. I compelled to keep a small army about my place all the time. A short time ago, 300 sheep were killed, 200 herders. I guess that 50 men didn't help any. For a while, it looked as though the entire Colorado militia would have been called out. But the sheepmen and cattlemen looked over for themselves, and there were several graves in the vicinity of Meeker That goes to show that they know how to do this. According to the incidents, took place on the morning of November 15th, 1899, when 40 masked men attacked a sheep camp located on the lower Snake River. During the foray, over 3,000 sheep were clobbered and scattered. The shepherds were robbed and their wagons were burned. Some word of the serious raids outside of northwest Colorado area occurred in 1887, 1896, 1902, 1905, 1909. In 1887, nearly 2,600 heads belonged to Charles Herbert perished when some cowboys burned down his corrals in Tie Sling, Wyoming. In 1896, in Wyoming, about 2,000 sheep were slaughtered in a single night by being driven off a cliff. God, the cliffs, they just kick them off cliffs? Really? This is like the third time they clicked them off cliffs near Northern Rock Springs. The violence reached its heights after turn of the century in 1902, where Thermopolis, Wyoming, several thousand sheep were slaughtered and their herders killed during the summer of 1905. 10 masked men attacked the sheep camp and Shell Creek in Bighorn Basin. There, the cowboys clubbed about 40,000 sheep out of 7,000, burned the wagons and 2 sheepdogs. Oh, they killed the sheepdogs. The owners of the massacred flock, Lewis A. Grands, lost about $40,000 as a result. I wonder how much. Yes, I don't. I read it and then I don't think to look up stuff. Yeah, $40,000 from 1900 to 2004 is 1,499 $1 million, $1.5 million. We'll just call it that because there's a lot of numbers after that. Anyways, out of all the sheep raids, the most serious insurrection since Spring Creek raid of April 2nd, 1909, just southwest of 10 Sheep, Wyoming, the sheep herder John Aldman, Stephen Hawking again,
Alamond.
and 2 of his competitions were shot and killed by 7 or 8 masked men. The raiders also killed about 25 sheep and 2. Man, why are you killing dogs? And burned the wagons with kerosene because sheep raiders had never been prosecuted in the Wyoming courts before. Many believed that the murderers would get away with the massacre. However, 7 men were eventually arrested, 5 of whom was sent to prison. The conviction of the 10 sheep murderers brought peace to the Bighorn County. After the 1909 attack, cattlemen were reluctant to raid sheep camps because now they risk being punished for it. That is so sad. They were doing all this because they weren't going to be punished, but now they are. They're like, whoa, 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 whoa! We're getting arrested now. Screw that. Let's listen a little bit. There were 2 more Wyoming sheep raids in 1911 and 1912. No more sheep herders were murdered. The last known sheep raid in Colorado occurred 8 years later in 1920, when 150 sheep were slaughtered for grazing in the White River National Forest. According to Robert Ellman, author of Bad Men of the West, the sheep wars ended because of the decline of open range lands and changes in ranching practices, which removed the cause for the hostility. And the Taylor Grazing Act of 1934 also eased some of the tension, which this act was to provide for regulation of grazing on public lands, including Alaska. I forget that Alaska wasn't a state until later on in the 19th century. To improve rangelands conditions and regulate their use, the law initiated permitted 80 million acres, 32 million hectares. Anyways, previous unreserved public land of the United States to be placed into grazing districts to be administered to the Department of Interior. As amended, the law is now set no limits to the amount of land in grazing districts occurring to their approximately 162 million acres. And I'm not saying the other one. Now, that is it on the sheep wars. Yeah, I was curious after looking up with James Miller last week, and I got curious because the sheep wars, never heard of it. It's like and I finally figured out in last episode. I couldn't figure out what the other war I was thinking of that was kind of curious is emu wars in Australia, which I found out it was just 3 guys shooting emus because they overgrew their stuff. But anyways, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you all for watching.